non-consanguineous marriage was a preterm 30-weeker. Caesarean section done in view of a premature rupture of membrane, birth weight 1.5, had history of NICU stay for about 45 days in view of NEC and prematurity. Was diagnosed to have albinism at birth. Two sisters and maternal grandfather suffered from the same. Was apparently alright till 2.5 years of age when started to have vomiting about 2 to 3 times per day. Was non-projectile, non-biliary, just contained some ingested food. Parents noticed abdominal distension about 1 year back, which was generalized persistent, so there was no aggravating or relieving factors. The child's developmental milestones were normal, but the motor milestones were delayed. In form of was child started to sit without supported 2 years of age, started to walk with supported 3 years of age, and just started to walk without support couple of months back. Language and social milestones were normal and appropriate for age. On direct questioning, the parents said that child had some irritability early morning after getting up and was better after a feed or a meal given to him. He used to ask for feed every half an hour to 1 hour and was better with it, and his daily meals would go up to 10 to 12 in a day. On examination, he's here. Darshan. For his anthropometry is 30.5 kg, which is less than 3rd percentile and 85% of the expected. Is again less than 3rd percentile with 78% of expected of 101 centimeter. Is generalized abdominal distension with hepatomegaly about 70 to 8 centimeter below the right costal margin and liver span about 10 to 12 centimeter, which is firm, smooth texture. There is hypotonia. On investigation, his random blood sugar done is 50. His IGTs were monitored, were in the range of 40s to 60s. His LFTs were deranged, like his SGOT was 845, SGPT 614, GGT 372. Bilirubin, albumin and PTIR were within normal limits. Lipid profile was deranged, cholesterol being 236 and triglycerides 521. Apoprotein A1 was 39, which was low, and ApoB was 183, which was high. His CPK levels were borderline high. In our reference, it was normal is up to 175, his was 230. His liver biopsy was done, which showed liver architecture was preserved in most of the region. In few areas, bands of fibrous tissue arising from the fibroportal areas extended to hepatocytes. And hepatocytes stain strongly positive with PAS stain and they disappear using PAS with -D staining. So summarizing, the 4-year-old male child, 3rd by order, born of non-consanguineous marriage, a preterm with NEC, persistent vomiting and abdominal distension with early morning irritability and increased demand of feeds and increased frequency of feeds, with short stature and underweight, delayed in motor milestones with hepatomegaly, deranged LFTs and deranged lipid profile, and liver biopsy suggesting glycogen-storage disease. The final impression was type 3A GSD,
With the albinism, I don't think that's part of the GST3, but this is classic. So your clinical impression of it being GST3 is on target. The other likely diagnosis is GST type 9, but common being common, and the fact that he did have some increase in CPK tells you that it's much more likely to be GST3. Yeah, so the only thing is I would say repeat the CPK on 2 or 3 occasions because it was just borderline increase and it could have been due to any reason. It's just slightly elevated. So I would just confirm that because if CPK is normal, then I would say it's more likely or could be likely to be GST type 9. So have you checked his glucoses through the day?
His AM glucose was around 50, and then prior to feeds, they all range in that 40-60 range.
There's no severe episodes.
But the important thing is he gets up 2-3 times in the night asking for milk. So he doesn't probably give, he doesn't let the sugars drop too much, I guess.
Actually, maybe I should talk about this while we're at it. So back here with it, and the history that you gave was so consistent. So typically, when the child is starting to be weaned, right? That's the time when you extend the period of a fast. That's when you start seeing symptoms in these children. And one of the first things that they can present with is really life-threatening hypoglycemia in the form of seizures. Or it can happen that, they have subclinical hypoglycemia because the body really has a threshold and it resets its threshold so that you and I will respond and be irritable at, say, a glucose of 60 or 70. Children with GSDs often, can handle themselves 40, 50. It's after that that they start to go down really, really fast. So it's critical that, we explain that to the parents, that don't only depend on the child's symptoms, because the symptoms may already be too late in the sense that the child is going to have an issue. So the other part really with the GSTs is the use of uncooked cornstarch, and I don't know if you are using that here or not. But I have to be very proud to say that that's work that happened out of Duke University by my mentor. This was about 30 years ago, when a trial was done using cornstarch, using potato starch, and using rice starch. And what was identified is that the uncooked cornstarch, if you cook the cornstarch, then you're breaking the polymers of glucose, right? Because cornstarch is nothing but a number of polymers of glucose. And so if you slightly cook it, then you've defeated the purpose of why you're giving the cornstarch. So the kind of dose that we try and say for a child with a glycogen storage disease is in infancy, because the demands of glucose are much more. The calculation is about 8 to 10 milligrams per kilogram per minute of glucose. As they get older, it can be 6 to 8 milligrams and then about 4 to 6 milligrams per kilogram per minute of glucose. So for type 3, if we are thinking this is glycogen storage disease type 3, which is debranching enzyme deficiency, what you have to think about is that the child is unable to break down the glycogen. So that source of glycogen or of utilization by glycogenolysis is not intact. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because there are other ways you can make glucose, one of which is neoglucogenesis. So that is why we recommend a high protein diet. Is if you give them protein, then via the protein source, via adenine, you can start to make the glucose. So for a child with GST3, especially if they are 3A, where there is a muscle component, I think there are two important reasons to give protein. One is for neoglucogenesis, and the second is that if you don't have enough protein on board, then the source that the body uses is endogenous protein breakdown. And in a muscle disease, which is already compromised because of glycogen buildup, if you stress it more, you're going to cause more muscle damage. The other thing to remember is for GST3, why is there an elevation of the AST and the ALT? Have you thought about that as compared to the other GSTs? So the reason is that because in the GSTs, in the glycogen storage diseases, the storage material that's being built up is either qualitatively abnormal or quantitatively abnormal, or both. So for the other GSDs, just remember it's GST3 and GST4, and I believe GST9, we're working on this closely, that the structure of the glycogen is not appropriate. So in debranching enzyme, what's happening is that, and I'll show you that as we do the presentation, it's only the outer branches of glycogen that are being broken down. So what is remaining in the body is an abnormal structure of glycogen. So if you have an abnormal structure, it's like a foreign body, right? It's like a nidus. And that's why you have the response with the elevation of the liver enzymes. In GST type 1, there is glycogen accumulation, but there's also a lot of fat accumulation, and the kind of glycogen that's accumulating is normal in its structure. So that's why you don't have this rise in the AST and the ALT. So clinically, when you see a persistent increase in AST and ALT, you can automatically, say it's more likely to be GST3 or 4 or 9. So that's how we sort it out, when we start thinking about the glycogen storage diseases. So you are absolutely on track. And then the next is the CPK. In this child, because there's an increase in the CPK, we know that, he's most likely a type 3A.
So the other part that I think our own textbook chapters are not exactly right is that they can actually have manifestations from pretty early on of a weakness. We often attribute it to the hepatomegaly and say that it's almost like a pregnant abdomen, and that's why the gait is not appropriate. But as we're doing more research and looking at it more closely, the muscle involvement actually does occur even in the first decade of life. So that's another part we have to think about, that nutrition is fairly important, of course, for all the conditions, but emphasizing a high protein diet, about 25% to 30%, in a patient with GSD type 3 is critical. The other reason to not give too much carbohydrate in GSD3 in particular is what is stored and what is not utilized is now being stored as abnormal glycogen. So it's actually worsening the problem rather than helping out with the problem. So talking a little bit more about GSD3, because we've got this young boy here, have you done an echocardiogram or an EKG on him? And those are normal. So what we are learning more and more about is just as the accumulation of glycogen is abnormal in the liver, it's abnormal also in the skeletal muscle, it's also abnormal in the heart muscle. And we are seeing sudden death in GSD3 patients. And what we think is going on is a cardiac arrhythmia. So we have seen at autopsy some of our adult patients with GSD3A where there's significant fibrosis and scar tissue in the heart muscle. So I think that's another thing to explain to these parents is not to overpush the children, when they express fatigue, to let them take a break and not move on. So as he gets older,